Hi, I'm Adam and welcome to one of our Christmas specials of South Wales Ghost Watch. And once again, I've got Martin here with me today. And today we're going to be talking about numerology. Okay, so Martin, what is numerology?
Numerology is an attempt to give interpretation to the world, the events that happen to us, our fate, our destiny, our experiences, by working out the value of numbers, which are given qualities and vibration, and enable us to understand how we can be more lucky, more successful, more able to interpret the world, and how we can plot things we should do and shouldn't do. There's different numerologies in different cultures, and I'm sure we're going to touch on some of those tonight.
Okay, so how was numerology popular with mathematicians such as Pythagoras?
Well, Pythagoras believed that the world had mathematical relationships, that certain numbers had certain connections and were connected to certain shapes. So, for example, Pythagoras' famous theorem was the theorem that the square on the hypotenuse was equal to the sum of the squares on the other two sides in right-angled triangles. So he noticed things like that 3, 4 and 5, if squared, 9, 16, added together, make 5 squared, 25. And he began to believe that there were patterns that you could identify. 3 was the number of the triangle, 4 was the number of the square, 5 is the pentagram, it has 5 points. And so he considered that not only the numbers were important, but that each of the numbers represented a shape. And you could build mathematical shapes from those numbers. Pythagoras was not only a mathematician, he was a mystic, and he was also interested in the occult and the hidden side of things. So Pythagoras is one of those characters in Greek mythology, Greek culture, who covers both the paranormal, the mathematical, the natural world, and so on. Pythagoras had a school in which he taught people other ways of looking at the world, numbers, mathematics, and so on. So Pythagoras could be seen as the first person one of the first people who began to, if you like, look at the structure of numbers in the world.
Okay, so do you think that numbers have a significance on the occult and how a person's life is influenced?
Well, let's look at numbers first of all. To the ancient Hebrews, they called their creator Yahweh or God, or they want to call him or her or it. He who loves moving from nothing to one. So in the movement from naught to one, you have a movement from nothing to there being one thing. So 1 is a very crucial number. It symbolises awareness of existence, of the self, of knowledge of the self. Then you get 2, which gives you the chance to meet a significant other person, a significant other force. 2 forces moving together to create the next one, which is 3. So you see patterns developing like that. So each number has a significance. So if you're trying to make sense of the world, you can assign numbers to all things. In the West, to humans, we usually count in tens. We have 10 fingers. If we were a race of civilized octopuses, we would probably count in 8s. So that 1 to an octopus would be 9, because there are 1 8 and 1. So numbers give us a way of looking at the world. In Christianity, we have the 3 in 1, Father, Son and Holy Ghost. In neo-paganism, there is the aspect of the goddess, Mother, Maiden, Crone. So numbers can be attached to all sorts of things. You've got the Hebrew Kabbalah, which gives numbers to each of the Hebrew letters. Aleph, Beth, Gamel, Daleth, can't remember anymore. Where each number has a particular significance that tells us about its qualities and the ability that it has in changing things. By chanting a number, by understanding the quality of a number, numerologists attempt to make clear what we can expect and how we can interpret.
You mentioned before the interview as well about different types of numerology. Can
Yes.
you go through that?
There are two basic forms of numerology. There is what I would call an American form, where we just arrange the letters, we write 1 to 9, and we just go A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, and so on,
Yeah.
so that we can associate each name, each letter, with a value. Then we have what we would call a system very famously created by Cairo, who was a numerologist in the 1920s and the 1930s. He took the Western alphabet and linked it into the Hebrew letters and took the Kabbalah numbers and built it like that. There were no 8s and 9s as such in that series. You just put equivalent values. Kabbalah, therefore, the Cairo version is probably more subtle, and there are traditions where it's connected with tarot cards, times of the year, certain sorts of patterns. And we have to remember that when we look at numerology, in terms of a Hebrew, the very worst number, which was a number which will immediately strike home with all of you, was 666, the number of the beast.
Yeah.
6 and 6 and 6 make 18, 1 and 8 make 9. The number of the Christian Jesus was 999, which adds up to 27, which 2 and 7 make 9. So to the Hebrews, only the very holy or the only very diabolic could have 9s. 9s behave in certain ways, certain patterns. It's a mystical number. The reason we were limited in the Hebrew system of numerology to 7 was because when this system was initially developed, we only knew about 7 planets. So you can fix in numbers to the planets, its quality. You can fit it in to patterns of time, 7 days in a week, 4 apostles, 4 quarters in neo-paganism, 4 seasons in the year, and you begin to develop. You can begin to interpret in that sort of way. So you take your pick. Probably having Spanish Jewish blood within myself from my past generation, I tend to prefer the Hebrew version of it myself. I think it's far more subtle, and it begins to throw up certain patterns.
Oh, right. So, do you think the people born on the same date will have the same future?
Well, I'll give you an example of that. If you follow a certain vibration, it's probable that you'll have elements within that. Mine is 7. So according to that, a 7 is somebody who is always interested in looking at the hidden, the unknown, the things that people do not often look at. Because 7 is a number of exploration. It's the first number after 3 sets of pairs. So you can look at a number pattern. People who tend to live in the same number of houses each time. People who tend to have bad luck if they live in certain numbers of certain houses. There's a tradition that people who have 4s and 8s have a very firm, very determined destiny that they find it very difficult to get out of, so that their lives are supposed to be more fated. 4, because it's a square, it's harder to move a square, and an 8 can be made into a pattern like that as well.
Okay.
So yes, I suppose there is a certain element like that. Remember, I suppose, if you feel a number is unlucky, if you notice there's a certain series of patterns in it, it may be a message from your unconscious that you're behaving in certain ways. Maybe it may be a pattern that helps you look at certain repetitive schemes in your life, certain things of bad luck that you have.
Okay.
I mean, I'll give you an example of that. Cairo did a study of, was it Cairo? I think it was one of Cairo's followers, looked at the life of Abraham Lincoln and John F. Kennedy. Lincoln was elected president in 1860. Kennedy was elected in 1960. Lincoln was born in 1817, JFK was born in 1917. Both are assassinated in the third year of their term. Oh no, I tell a lie. In the same month, on the same day, but a century earlier. Now that's a bit interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting, yeah.
Yeah. And if you look at patterns like World War I ended on November the 11th. 11 is a number of redemption and understanding. To the traditional neo-pagan belief, November the 11th is Old Halloween. When we changed the clock we changed the date in the 17th century, 18th century, we just lost 11 days. So November the 11th was Old Halloween.
Okay. Yeah.
So that's quite an interesting
I don't know that.
Yeah, so you've got all sorts of patterns like that. The god Mithras was born on the equivalent of December the 25th, which is traditionally the date of the birth of Christ. There are 4 U's in a churchyard, or all churchyards. There are patterns in things like that.
Okay. So, do you believe that numerology is a superstition?
Right. Well, if there are no absolute truths in the world, and that we are there to interpret the world in a pattern that makes sense to us, all things that make us feel good are superstitions, because we cannot prove any of them to be true. Numerology is an attempt to make sense of the world. If you look at patterns in nature, there is a system called the Fibonacci system. When a plant grows a leaf, it usually goes 1, 2, 3, 5, 7, 11. There's a pattern there by which, if you add the previous number together, you get the next one.
Right.
And there is a hidden pattern there. Now, I don't think that's a superstition. I think it's a way that things progress. Numbers are our attempt to interpret the world. If you think about how numbers begin, we count. We have 1, 2, and in certain cultures, you then have many and a lot. Numbers enable us to count, to be rational, but numbers themselves behave in strange ways. They follow a pattern that seems to have been there before there were numbers. We create a pattern and it's there. It's almost like a signature of an order within the world. So no, I don't think numerology is a superstition. I think it's an attempt to interpret the world, and if that makes sense to you, then that's fine.
And rationalise what goes on around us. Yes.
I mean, if you think of the most irrational number, an irrational number is a number where you can't get it precisely. A number that keeps on going with the decimal points. If you think of, I don't know, I'm going to assume the mathematical knowledge here, but there is a very crucial number that Pythagoras developed, pi. 22/7. If you want to find the area of a circle,
Pi r squared.
pi r squared, 22/7 times the radius squared. You can never get what pi is, because if you start dividing by 22,
Is this like 3.14 or something?
that's right, 3.1414, it goes on like that.
Yeah,
It goes on forever. So it's an irrational number.
yeah.
So if you think about it, it's an approximation for getting the area of a circle, but we never get the area of the circle correct. The ancient Egyptians did not have pi. The Greeks did.
Yeah.
And it was Pythagoras, I think it was Pythagoras, who developed pi, or one of his followers, and numbers approximated to the world. Numbers are an invention of humans, yet seem to have a pattern for interpreting the world. And the way that mathematics is going these days begins to resemble the ideas of the paranormal, that there are 11 dimensions, that that space and time is the same thing. Einstein discovered it was curved. That as space moved on, time moved on, space became curved. And the difficulty that you and I have in understanding that is that we can't think of time as being curved because we see time as a straight line. So numbers are just an attempt to understand the world.
Okay. So tell me about Chinese numerology and the influence of numbers. It's my
Yeah.
understanding that some numbers bring
Yeah.
good luck and bad
Yes,
luck.
that's
Yeah.
right. To the Chinese, the number 13 is the luckiest number that there is because it adds up to 4. To the Chinese, a 4 and an 8 is very lucky. So if you were in Hong Kong and had a number like 484788, that's a bloody lucky number because it's got lots of 4s and 8s in it.
Yeah.
The clinic I work in, we have a Chinese doctor, and her phone number was virtually made completely of 4s and 8s. If you had a number like that in Hong Kong, you could probably sell it for about $1 million.
Okay. Yeah.
Because to the Chinese, it's entirely different. 4 is completion. It's attainment, it's power, it's order. 3 is unlucky because it's about struggle. The Chinese I Ching is a method of binary numbers, where you either have a long line or two dashes. Those of you who remember maths, we used to have 0 and 1.
0 and 1.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To the Chinese, it would be a long line or 2 separate lines. So their thing of the I Ching is based around 1 or 2 bits. It's a binary system. And to them, everything can be expressed in that way. They have a method of called I Ching, which there are 42 hexagrams. You can have, and these change. So everything is interpreted in terms of these hexagrams, which each has a meaning. The last one is 42, and I seem to remember from the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, the answer to everything was 42. I think that's quite an interesting coincidence.
Yes, yes.
So to the Chinese, there's a different connection there. But how we perceive unlucky and lucky numbers depends largely on our culture. 13 in the West was traditionally the number of knights at the round table, the number of disciples at the Last Supper. The number 13 is the number you get in a witch's coven. Traditionally, many neo-pagans would argue that when you have 13 people, there is always likely to be a traitor among the 13. So 13 is seen as unlucky.
For that main reason.
For that main reason.
Yeah.
That's why we have Friday the 13th as the most unlucky day.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. A, because it's traditionally the day in which Christ died, yeah, and 13 is an unlucky number.
But you find for a lot of people, they don't experience bad luck.
Precisely, they don't experience bad luck.
Yeah, yeah.
If you tune into vibrational energy, if you accept it, anything you do can be good luck or bad luck, depending on how you perceive it.
Okay, so who is St. Augustine of Hippo?
Right. St. Augustine was the 4th century founder, I suppose you could say, of modern Catholicism. He was brought up as a pagan originally. He tried different beliefs. He tried Neoplatonism, where Plato was very interested in numbers, and he became a Christian and wrote City of God. He believed that you could, because it was Platonism, where numbers is very important. Plato, incidentally, inherited a lot of ideas from Pythagoras. You've got a link there between Pythagoras, Plato and St. Augustine. Whether St. Augustine would have seen it like that, I don't know. But there is a pattern that you can understand what happens in the world by understanding patterns of numbers. Lucky numbers, good numbers, bad numbers, and so on. And from that background, St. Augustine would have understood the world by making predictions and understandings from the basis of numbers. He would have seen it as evidence that there is a creator behind the universe. And his legacy has probably led to a belief that there is literally an end to the world. Now, from my perspective, and an Eastern perspective, numbers go on forever. So my own perspective is that the world goes on forever. St. Augustine was thinking of the beginning and the end. So that's his influence there.
Right. So do most religions favour numerology?
They do to an extent, though perhaps not all would accept that. If you look at the influence of astrology, many early Christians in the Middle Ages looked at the movement of the stars and could read connections between the stars, and when such and such made a connection with such and such, it meant that this was going to happen. To the Muslim, to the Islamic mind, numbers are similarly evidence of Allah working in the world, who leaves behind clues for the learned and the holy to discover the real structure of the universe. To the Jew, the Kabbalah was a means by which every letter in the Hebrew alphabet was believed to be a living creature and have a particular number. The most holy words, the most holy letters in Hebrew are the vowels. And that's why in Hebrew and in Egyptian language, in older hieroglyphics, no vowels are actually used at all, because these are the power, and these have numbers that only the truly holy can understand. To the Hebrew, Yahweh, or Yod He Vah He, represented those secret numbers. So if I was going to write Adam, yes, in Hebrew or in hieroglyphics, I would only use D and M.
Discard the vowels. Yes.
Discard the vowels. So that means, right, that when we came to find your name written on a pyramid or something like that, all we'd see was that D and M was there. So you could be Udum, Idum, Edom, or Adam.
Yeah, I'll sit down.
Or, yeah, it had to be an A.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, of course.
Vowel,
yes. My
yeah.
apologies. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So each letter had a value, but there were certain letters that were so powerful that you didn't write them down. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yod He Vah He. Yeah. Would be very powerful.
Okay.
So, and also I suppose to the Chinese, numbers. The world goes in 60-year cycles. There are 12 animals in the Chinese horoscope, and there are 5 elements. I think I'll get this right. There is metal, wood, earth, fire and water. So that somebody born in a particular year would be an earth dog or a metal dragon, and each of these would have particular elements in them. So that's how numerology would be worked out. Things go in 60-year cycles.
Okay, right, yeah.
Now, if we think about 13, for example, in the West, there are 13 moons. There are 12 months. So you've got this constant interplay with numbers and looking at patterns behind it. There is all sorts of things, of conspiracies, theories about secrets hidden. So all religions basically share an interpretation of number as a means of understanding and acting in the world.
Okay. So tell me about certain numerology books. There's one which you mentioned prior to the interview, Power of Numbers by Ruth Droyer.
Yes, I'm not so much familiar with that one. I suspect there's 2 that stand out in my mind. There's a book by Cairo called Numerology, and that's a very detailed study. looking at the significance of numbers. Well worth having a look at. It's a bit dated, but nevertheless it's very, very powerful. It tells you the significance of all the numbers. It tells you what each number represents, what it's linked with, what element it's linked with, what time of the year it's linked with. And then there are things like the numerology workbook, which are modern interpretations using both that Hebrew method and the more, if you like, Western method that we've used. And an excellent book by Jeanette Goodman on numerology. But looking at that, she seems to have copied most of it out from Cairo. I think it was just after the 50-year rule, so it wasn't really copying, it was just research. That's what we say academically. When you copy from one book, it's cheating. When you copy from three, it's called academic research. So those are very powerful, those are very interesting books. There was a tradition in an old Welsh tradition of putting the key in the Bible and turning it and seeing which verse came up. And that was supposed to have significance as well. We've also got things like when we see a magpie, 1 for sorrow, 2 for joy, 3 for a girl, 4 for a boy, 5 for silver, 6 for gold, 7 for a secret, never to be told, 8's a wish, and 9's a kiss. Yeah, each of those is supposed to have a significance. But you see, remember, we are continually interpreting the world, and if a particular method makes sense to you, it's a way of interpretation. It's how you see it, it's how positive it is. But there is a tendency for people of the same number to be called together, to have similar vibrational energy.
Yeah.
If the universe is effectively made up of mathematical formula, then I'm sure these things fit together.
So what you're trying to say is some people get on with other people because
Yeah.
certain numbers in your life
Yeah,
have
it might be a representation
Yeah.
of things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, of, if you like, attunement, of vibrational attunement.
Or certain aspects of someone's personality.
Yes,
yeah,
that's
yeah.
right.
Okay.
I mean, I would be very interested to know how many people in parapsychology have the number 7. A lot of people in psychology, I know, have the number 7 in their name. And it may simply be that, that's a method of reading something else. Just as temperature, pressure and volume are related, yeah? T1 and P1 over V1 equals T2, P2 over V2 with that old physics formula.
Yeah, yeah.
Perhaps we can look at relationships of numbers in that certain sort of way.
Okay. So are numbers significant in the modern world?
Well, if you think about it, we live by the clock. Yeah?
Yeah. Time is very
Time is
important,
different, yeah? My other half is working in Amazon at the moment, nights. And what she's managed to do over the last week is reverse time. It takes the body a little while to swap that over. But we all understand the world by numbers. We know how much we get paid by the hour, how many hours we work, and we assume value from that. There's no reason that why we shouldn't see a connection between fractals and patterns. If you took the formula x squared plus y squared plus z squared and fed into it a whole series of numbers, you could plot that on a computer, on a diagram, so that it built elaborate patterns throughout the world that grew in that you could actually see the patterns represented in a diagrammatic form.
Almost like an equation or something,
Yeah,
numbers and stuff,
precisely.
Yeah. So these
but you
numbers
could
are
actually
variables.
represent it by the value of the numbers, giving them colours, shapes or whatever. And you could show that. The basis of modern computing is effectively a number. It's basically a binary code of 0 and 1. So, if you tend to believe in lucky numbers, yeah, it's another attempt to interpret the world. So, patterns of numbers help us understand the world. The people in medieval churches, if you looked up at the structure of the church, you would see holy connections between certain numbers. This is how it's meant to be. Order is represented by rational numbers, disorder by irrational numbers. So there are all sorts of ways of seeing the relevance of numbers.
Okay.
Yeah? Frequencies are numbers.
Yeah.
speed are numbers. That's why numerology is so powerful. Whether we like it or not, it's the value we attribute to it.
Okay. Do you favour the idea that we all have our own lucky numbers then?
I tend to.
Yeah.
I'm always very fortunate by sevens. I look for people who I notice have sevens, and I think that if you begin to believe a number is lucky for you, it will make you feel more positive, and as a result you will be more successful. If you fear something, if you see it as unlucky, then you don't make the most of it. But what that means is, perhaps it gives you clues. Uspensky used to talk about the eternal return, significant times. Last night we had a full moon and we had a lunar eclipse. That was supposed to be a time when we could perceive things in different ways. Without a particular number, a code, to get into a particular program, to get onto somebody's computer, we have passwords which are numerological. People tend to look for numbers that are lucky and give them understanding. So, yes, there are lucky numbers.
Okay. Yeah.
But like anything, it's a question of learning to recognise it.
Okay. So should we fear the certain numbers that will bring us bad luck?
If we believe a number will bring us bad luck, it probably will. The Chinese, 13 is very lucky. To the rest of us,
Pagans in the West and so.
yeah. I mean, I don't think a pagan would particularly worry about 13. Probably from that sort of background, they might worry more about 4s and 8s because of the limitation of square numbers. After all, we do use the old expression. I'm sufficiently old to remember the expression, he's a square, meaning he's out of date. He's not somebody who understands what's going on. So you can see how powerful numbers influence our culture.
Yes, yeah.
The last time I was politically active, I lost by 8 votes. I think that's quite interesting. People tend to avoid certain days. I don't think we should fear certain numbers. Perhaps we should use them as means of predicting, but whether we should fear them, whether we should fear other things or not.
Okay. So how is numerology associated with the paranormal? And more paranormal investigators like myself. And
well, if you're making an investigation into something, it would be useful to look at series of numbers and what they mean in terms of certain places and certain times. Like last night, it was the 28th of November, yeah? Was it? Yes.
Yes.
And we had a full moon.
Yes.
4 sevens are 28. A woman's menstrual cycle is usually 28 days. There are patterns that occur there. If you look for connections between any group of people in a paranormal investigation, you'll find some really interesting cross-sectional links with numbers occurring again and again. You might even find it in numbers of houses. You might even find it at particular times of year, and so on. The moon goes through 8 stages from the dark of the moon to the full moon. It goes through. You can read. It's a way of predicting connection. It's a way of reading things. Just as you might as well want to look at similar events occurring to people. Did certain things happen at certain times to them so many years ago? Is this an anniversary of a date? Yeah. Hauntings may occur on a pattern on the day that the death occurred a year later. Yeah?
Yes.
2 years later, 100 years later, and so on. So you need to look for patterns.
okay.
That's why it's valuable in parapsychological research.
Okay, well thank you very much, Martin,
Thank
for coming
you.
on the show. It's been a pleasure as always talking to
Okay.
you. And I'm afraid that's all we've got time for tonight. But
And a happy Christmas.
Yes, a Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to you all.
And according to the Mayans, if the world really does come to an end on the 21st, then you're never going to see this show. But I really have the confidence
Yes.
that they only ran out of space then. 1400 years ago was probably quite enough to put a calendar forward.
Yes. Okay, well, thank you very much, and we'll see you all next week, usual time, 7 o'clock.